It's
In a
collapsing.
blinding Sierra
Help us!
Nevada blizzard,
We're falling!
4 climbers vanished beneath the snow.
We have the
The
location.
GPS
We're pushing
pointed
east now.
rescuers east,
Send the ground team to Sector
but the
4. We
mountain
need to
had
move
swallowed
fast.
the truth somewhere else. Then a wounded German shepherd appeared at the trailhead, trembling, bleeding, and refusing to run away. He grabbed a former Navy SEAL by the pant leg and pulled him toward the storm. No one knew the dog had already seen where the missing climbers disappeared, and what Caleb found under the snow would prove that miracles sometimes come on 4 wounded paws. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers so we can keep bringing you stories like this. By the last week of May, the high trails of the Sierra Nevada should have been loosening their grip on winter. Down in the valley, people had already started talking about summer. Gas stations had put out coolers of ice. Tourists drove with windows cracked open. In the towns below the mountains, children wore t-shirts and old men complained about pollen. But above 8,000 feet, the mountain kept its own calendar. That afternoon, winter came back like an old king who had not been invited but still remembered the throne. Clouds rolled over the ridgeline, low and bruised, swallowing the sun until the world turned the color of ash. Snow began as a harmless dusting over the pines, then thickened into a hard white curtain that erased the trail markers, the rocks, the old boot prints, and finally the distance itself. Caleb Mercer stood beside his old truck at the trailhead and watched the storm close in. At 35, Caleb had the kind of strength that did not announce itself. He stood a little over 6 feet, about 1.83 meters, lean and hard in the way of men shaped by endurance rather than mirrors. His shoulders were broad, but not bulky. His face was clean-shaven, exposing a square jaw and sharp cheekbones that gave him a stern look even when he was only thinking. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, just a little longer than regulation, as if some small part of him had refused to keep obeying orders after the uniform came off. Northern wind had weathered his fair skin into a rougher shade, and his gray-blue eyes carried the stillness of a man who had learned long ago that panic was a luxury. And he wore the same kind of clothes he trusted in bad weather, an old olive tactical combat shirt softened by years of use, the cuffs and shoulders lightly frayed, faded from washing and mountain sun, moss-green combat pants with worn knees and cargo pockets sagging from habit, old military work boots, and a battered military watch that had survived more places than he cared to remember. He had been a Navy SEAL once. Now he lived in a small cabin not far from the western trailhead, helping the local search and rescue team when the mountain took someone and refused to give them back. He was not officially on duty that day, but Caleb had never fully learned how to be off duty. In the back of his truck were rope, carabiners, a radio, a headlamp, a knife, emergency blankets, a medical kit, and a winter shell jacket. Some men kept fishing rods in their vehicles. Caleb kept away to survive bad decisions. His radio cracked. "Mercer, this is Bell. You at the west lot?" Caleb lifted it. "I'm here." Maribel's voice came through thin and hard under the static. She was the search and rescue lead for the county, 42 years old, compact and strong, with chestnut brown hair usually tied low at the back of her neck, and eyes that seemed to measure weather, distance, and human stupidity in the same glance. Mara was not unkind, but kindness in her line of work had to wear boots. She had seen too many people trust blue skies at noon and die under whiteout by evening. "We've got 4 missing climbers," she said. Last GPS ping was near the eastern switchback, just below the split. Signal stopped 26 minutes ago. Caleb looked toward the slope where the trail vanished between snow-dark pines. Any radio contact? Nothing useful. And one broken transmission before they dropped. Could be battery. Could be terrain. Could be the storm eating everything. Names? A pause. Paper rustled somewhere on Mara's end. Naomi Carter, Paul Hensley, Aaron Walsh, Lucas Dunn. Experienced enough to get overconfident. Not experienced enough for this. Caleb closed his eyes briefly. 4 names. 4 warm bodies turning colder by the minute. The kind of numbers that became ghosts if men waited too long. He opened the truck door and reached for his pack. Behind him, one of the younger SAR volunteers, Derek Lyle, hurried across the lot with a coil of rope over one shoulder. Derek was barely 26, tall and freckled, with nervous energy that made him look younger than he was. He had the eager, frightened decency of someone who wanted badly to be useful, and had not yet learned that mountains did not reward wanting. "Mara says we're pushing east," Derek called. "GPS puts them near the switchback." Caleb nodded, but something in his chest tightened. The east side made sense on the map. Too much sense. The kind of sense that got comfortable before it got dangerous. Then he heard the sound. Not a bark. Not at first. A wet, scraping sound came from near the trail sign. Caleb turned. At the edge of the parking lot, half hidden by blowing snow, stood a German shepherd. He was not a puppy. Not truly. He was a full-grown male, around 5 years old, yellow and black beneath the wet snow clinging to his coat. His frame was strong but too lean, the ribs not showing sharply but hinted at beneath the fur, as if hunger had been arguing with survival for a long time. His muzzle was black, his ears upright, his amber-brown eyes bright with an intelligence that seemed almost uncomfortable to look at. Around his neck hung an old brown leather collar, cracked and darkened by weather, with no visible tag. The dog shivered, but he did not cower. Caleb took one slow step toward him. "Easy," he said. The shepherd stared at him. Derek made a small, sympathetic noise. Poor thing. Probably dumped by campers. Caleb crouched and held out a gloved hand. The dog did not sniff it. He did not back away. He looked past Caleb, up toward the western slope, then back at Caleb with a strange urgency burning in his eyes. Caleb felt something shift. A hungry dog looked at a hands. A frightened dog looked for exits. This dog looked at the mountain. Caleb reached into his pocket and pulled out half an energy bar. "Here." The shepherd glanced at the food, then ignored it. Derek blinked. "That's new." The dog suddenly lunged forward. Caleb's body reacted before thought did. His weight shifted, his hand dropped, ready to control the animal without hurting him. But the shepherd did not go for his hand, his throat, or the food. He bit into the thick fabric of Caleb's pant leg near the boot and pulled, hard. "Hey!" Derek shouted. "Get off!" Caleb raised one hand to stop him. The dog released, backed 2 steps toward the western trail, then charged back and grabbed the pant leg again. And he pulled, let go, turned, looked up the slope and pulled again. Not attack, not hunger, insistence. As if the animal had found the only man in the storm who might understand being dragged toward danger by something that did not speak. Caleb looked down at him, and a cold feeling moved through his ribs. The dog whined once, low and raw. His paws were bleeding lightly, red marks blooming in the snow beneath him. He had come from somewhere above, not wandered from the road, not drifted in from a cabin. He had come down through the storm with purpose. Then the shepherd did something no frightened stray should have done. He stepped behind Caleb, pressed his shoulder against the man's leg, and tried to turn him away from the SAR trucks, away from the eastern search route, toward the west. For a moment, the whole trailhead seemed to hold its breath. Snow hissed across the parked vehicles. Wrong. The radio clicked with broken voices. Derek stared at the dog, then at Caleb, no joke left in his face. Mara's truck rolled into the lot a minute later, headlights cutting weak tunnels through the snow. She climbed out in a red and black rescue jacket, hood up, radio clipped to her shoulder. Her face was narrow and wind-reddened, her mouth set in the expression of someone carrying responsibility heavier than any pack. She took one look at the dog tugging Caleb's pant leg and frowned. "What is this?" "German Shepherd," Derek said. "No tag." "I can see that." Caleb did not move. "He came from the west." Mara looked toward the slope. "Our last known point is east." "Last known point," Caleb said. "Not current position." Her eyes hardened slightly. Not anger, fear wearing discipline. "Caleb, I have 4 missing people, weather closing fast, and 1 usable data point. I can't redirect a team because a stray dog likes your pants." The shepherd growled softly. Not at Mara, not exactly. More at the delay. He grabbed Caleb's pant leg again and pulled until the fabric stretched. Derek whispered, "That dog is not acting random." Mara heard him, but kept her gaze on Caleb. "You know what happens if we split wrong." "Yes." "And you know what happens if I send people west and the GPS was right." "Yes." Caleb's voice stayed calm, but inside him something old had begun to wake. Years earlier, in a place of rock and cold and bad radio, he had heard a pawn breathing through static. A teammate pinned beyond reach. Caleb had moved as fast as human flesh could move. It had not been fast enough. Since then, silence had never been empty to him. It always sounded like someone waiting. The shepherd looked up at him. Those amber eyes were not pleading for food or warmth, and they were carrying news from a place no human had reached. Caleb turned to Mara. "Give me 20 minutes on the western spur. I'll mark my route. Radio open. If I find nothing, I turn back." Mara looked at the dog again. The shepherd trembled so hard now that snow fell from his shoulders in little bursts. Still, he would not leave Caleb's leg. Mara exhaled, a sharp white cloud in the cold. 20 minutes. No hero work. Caleb almost smiled. "You called the wrong man for that." "No," she said. "I called the right one. That's why I'm telling you not to make me regret it." Caleb pulled his pack from the truck, clipped the radio to his shoulder, and checked the rope with hands that remembered every knot better than they remembered peace. Derek handed him an extra flare. "For luck," Derek said. Caleb took it. Luck is what people call preparation when they survive. The shepherd stepped toward the trail, then looked back to make sure Caleb was following. Caleb glanced once toward the SAR team forming near the eastern route. Men and women in bright jackets, maps in gloved hands, faith placed in the last clean number technology had given them. Then he looked west. There was no trail anymore. Only storm, timber, and a dog with blood on his paws. The radio crackled at his shoulder. "Team 1 moving east," Mara's voice announced. Scout pulled once more at Caleb's pant leg. Caleb did not know the dog's name yet. He did not know where the shepherd had come from, or why he had chosen him, or what waited beyond the white wall of trees. But as the dog released the fabric and stepped into the storm, Caleb felt the old certainty settle over him like armor. The data might not be wrong, but it was not telling the whole truth. and somewhere above them, 4 people were waiting for someone to listen to what the mountain had tried to bury. Caleb followed the German shepherd into the snow. Caleb Mercer followed the German shepherd past the first line of pines, and the trailhead disappeared behind him as if the storm had swallowed the world in one breath. The dog moved ahead, not fast, not wild, but with the strained urgency of an animal carrying a message too heavy for its own body. Snow clung to the black saddle of his back and gathered along the yellow fur of his shoulders. Every few steps, he stopped, turned his head to check that Caleb was still there, then pressed onward again. Caleb did not pull him back. He had seen enough fear in animals to know the difference between panic and purpose. Panic scattered. Purpose returned to the same direction, again and again, even when the body was shaking. His radio cracked against his shoulder. "Mercer," Maribel's voice said, thin under the static. "Status." "Still on the western spur," Caleb answered. "A dog is holding direction." A pause came through the line. He could almost see Mara's face in it, the tight mouth, the narrowed eyes, the calculation she carried like a second spine. "Team 1 is moving toward the eastern switchback," she said. "Last known point puts the climbers there." Caleb glanced up through the pines. The western slope rose darker than the rest of the mountain, its granite ribs half buried under new snow. "Last known point," he said, "only tells us where the signal stopped. It tells us more than a stray does." The dog halted at the word, though he could not have understood it. He looked back at Caleb, amber eyes bright beneath a dusting of white. Caleb lowered his voice. "He is not acting like a stray." The line hissed. Mara did not answer immediately. She was a woman who believed in procedure because procedure had kept people alive, and at 42, she had the lean, weather-hardened look of someone built by mountain seasons rather than comfort. Chestnut hair, tied low and tight beneath her hood. Skin reddened by years of wind. Eyes gray-brown and sharp, always measuring. She had a way of speaking that made even bad news stand at attention. But Caleb also knew what she feared. If she trusted a dog and sent rescuers into the wrong terrain, she could lose the missing climbers and her own people, too. "Your 20 minutes started 5 minutes ago," she said. "Copy." He clipped the radio back and crouched beside the dog. The shepherd's paws were worse than Caleb had thought. The pads were cracked, with thin red lines cut across them by ice. His coat smelled of wet fur, pine resin, old smoke, and something faintly human. Snack wrappers, nylon, sweat, wool. He had been close to people recently. Not days ago, hours. Caleb reached into his pack, tore off a strip from a spare bandage, and wrapped the worst paw quickly. The dog held still. That surprised him more than the bite at his pant leg had. Most abandoned dogs flinched when hands came near their feet. This one watched Caleb's face as if deciding whether the man could be trusted with pain. "Who had you before this?" Caleb murmured. The shepherd did not answer, of course. He only lifted his bandaged paw, stepped once in the snow, and turned uphill again. Behind Caleb, the radio came alive with another voice. "Mercer, Derek here." Caleb pressed the button. "Go." Derek Lyle sounded breathless, probably half running between vehicles at the trailhead. The young volunteer had a freckled, open face and a habit of talking too quickly when nervous. He was not foolish, only knew enough that fear still came wrapped in eagerness. "I checked the social post the climbers made this morning," Derek said, "the one Naomi Carter uploaded before they lost service." Caleb stopped. The dog stopped too. Derek continued. There's a dog in the photo. Static scratched through the line. Caleb looked down at the shepherd. Say that again. A German shepherd. Same yellow-black coat. Old brown collar. He's standing by Naomi's pack. She's holding out part of a protein bar. Looks like she fed him. For a moment, the storm seemed to draw back from Caleb's hearing. There it was. Not proof, not yet. But a thread. The dog had not come from nowhere. He had not invented danger out of hunger or cold. He had known them. He had walked with them. He had been given one small mercy by strangers on a mountain that offered none. And now he had come back. Mara broke into the channel. Derek, send that photo to my phone. Already trying. A signal is trash. Try anyway. Caleb looked at the dog again. The shepherd's amber eyes did not soften. They burned with the same relentless urgency, but now Caleb understood it differently. This was not a wild animal dragging a man toward noise. This was a witness returning to the last place kindness had vanished. Something old moved inside Caleb, slow and painful. Years ago, on a cold ridge half a world away, a man had waited for him behind fallen stone. Caleb had followed coordinates, orders, timing, procedure. He had moved fast. He had moved correctly. He had still arrived too late. Since then, the phrase last known point had always sounded to him like a confession, a place where the world admitted what it no longer knew. The dog gave a low whine and stepped forward. Caleb rose. Bell, he said into the radio. If that photo confirms he was with them, this dog may be our only living witness. Witnesses usually talk, Mara replied. This one already is. No answer came. Only wind. Then Mara said, quieter, Do not romanticize this, Caleb. He almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm not. You get one narrow sweep. A west spur to the granite shelf, no farther unless you find hard evidence. Understood. And Mercer? Yeah. If the weather turns, you come back. I will not put your name on the same list as theirs. Caleb looked into the white slope ahead. Names. Naomi Carter. Paul Hensley. Aaron Walsh. Lucas Dunn. 4 people reduced to syllables over a radio. He wondered what they had looked like before the storm took their edges away. Naomi in Derek's photo, offering food to a dog no one else had claimed. Paul maybe laughing too loudly at the cold, trying to act tougher than the mountain. Aaron and Lucas adjusting straps, trusting the day because the morning had seemed harmless. That was how mountains tricked people. Not with teeth at first, with beauty. Copy, Caleb said. He moved on. The western spur narrowed beyond the first trees. Snow covered the old trail, but Caleb knew the shape of the land beneath it. A shallow climb. A bent pine split by lightning. A granite shoulder that caught wind from the west. In clear weather, hikers used the spur as a shortcut back toward the main loop. In a whiteout, it became a corridor of wrong decisions. The shepherd walked ahead, nose low, then suddenly veered left. Caleb followed him off the trail bed and found a shallow depression in the snow beside a fallen branch. Not a footprint exactly, more like the ghost of one. Too blurred to read, almost gone. He knelt. The print was larger than Derek's boot, smaller than Caleb's, a civilian hiking boot, fresh enough to have survived beneath the new snowfall, old enough to be fading. The dog pressed his nose beside it and inhaled sharply. Good boy, Caleb whispered. At the sound, the shepherd's ears twitched. Caleb realized he had no name for him. The dog had a collar, but no tag. No identity except the one given by action. He had come out of the storm, bleeding, and grabbed hold of the one man he believed might follow. A small, bitter laugh escaped Caleb. "Scout," he said. The shepherd looked back. It might have been coincidence. It probably was. But he looked back. "All right," Caleb said softly. "Scout." The name settled between them, plain and fitting. Not heroic, not grand. Just a word for the one who went ahead and found what others missed. They climbed another 20 yards. The wind intensified, carrying needles of ice that stung Caleb's cheeks. He pulled his hood tighter and checked the time. 11 minutes left before Mara's deadline. Less, if the storm worsened. He could already hear her voice in his head, practical and hard. Turn back before instinct becomes ego. The scout stopped again. This time he did not sniff the ground. He lifted his head toward the trees and stood perfectly still. Caleb followed his gaze. There, half buried against the base of a pine, was a torn corner of silver packaging. A protein bar wrapper, caught in the bark and fluttering like a tiny flag of surrender. Caleb picked it up carefully. The brand matched the half-bar he had tried to feed Scout at the trailhead. Common enough, not evidence by itself, but the wrapper was creased and damp, not old. A smear of something dark marked one edge. Chocolate, maybe, or dirt. Scout nudged Caleb's wrist with his nose, impatient. "I see it," Caleb said. He keyed the radio. "Bell, I have a partial boot depression and a fresh energy bar wrapper on the western spur. Not conclusive, but consistent with movement this way. Static." And then Mara. "Mark it." Caleb pulled a small strip of orange tape from his pack and tied it to a branch. Mara continued. "Team 1 still has no sign east. I'm holding them on grid for now, but keep feeding me anything you find." That was as close to belief as Mara Bell would allow herself. Caleb moved again, Scout pushing ahead. The dog's limp was more visible now. Every step cost him. His body was strong, but exhaustion was beginning to collect in him like snow on a roof. Caleb wanted to pick him up and carry him back to warmth, food, a dry blanket, but Scout would not go back. That was the cruelty of it. The dog had found help, but not rescue. Not yet. He had found a man who could understand the shape of urgency, and urgency had no mercy for wounded paws. A gust of wind tore through the pines, bending them until their branches groaned. Snow swirled so thickly that even the orange tape behind them vanished. Caleb paused and turned. The trailhead was gone. The SAR trucks were gone. Mara, Derek, the maps, the last known point, all of it had disappeared behind the storm. Only Scout remained visible. A yellow-black shape ahead of him, standing at the mouth of the western timber as if he had been carved there by need. The dog looked back one more time. Then he stepped into the white. Caleb checked his rope, touched the radio at his shoulder, and followed. The western slope did not welcome Caleb Mercer and Scout. It erased them. 10 minutes beyond the last visible marker, the trail was no longer a trail, but a rumor buried under fresh snow. The trees thinned into tall, black shapes, their branches bent under white weight, groaning whenever the wind struck from the side. Above them, the mountain had vanished into a moving wall of snow so dense it seemed less like weather and more like a living thing breathing against the earth. Caleb moved with his shoulders low and his head angled into the wind. Each step sank deep, sometimes to the knee, sometimes higher, where the snow had drifted over hidden pockets in the ground. His old military boots found rock, then ice, then nothing certain. He had crossed deserts where heat bent the horizon, and cities where smoke turned daylight brown, but cold had its own cruelty. Cold did not rage. Cold waited. It let men make one lazy decision, then collected them quietly. Scout pushed ahead. The German shepherd was 5 years old, strong under the thinness hunger had left behind, yellow and black fur plastered by wet snow. His old brown leather collar had frozen stiff at the edges. The quick bandage Caleb had tied around one paw was already dark with moisture, but Scout kept moving with a stubborn rhythm, nose low, ears cutting through the wind. He was not graceful now. He limped. He stumbled. He stopped often to smell the air and the snow, then changed direction to by a few degrees, as if correcting a map only he could see. But he was not perfect. Twice he circled back on his own tracks. Once he led Caleb toward a cluster of low brush and found nothing but ice-caked branches and a squirrel's abandoned nest. Another time he stopped so suddenly that Caleb nearly stepped on him, then turned in a full circle, confused, whining under his breath. That made Caleb trust him more. A trained dog might move like a tool. Scout moved like a creature fighting through fear, pain, memory, and weather. He did not know the mountain's language. He only knew something terrible had happened somewhere above them, and everything in him refused to turn away. "Easy," Caleb said, though the word was more for himself than the dog. The radio gave a burst of static. "Mara to Mercer, report." Caleb pressed the transmitter. "Visibility down to maybe 15 feet, continuing west-northwest along the granite spur." Mara Bell's voice came back broken by wind and distance. "Team 1 is still negative east. No tracks, no heat signature. Drone grounded." Caleb glanced at Scout, and the dog stood with his nose pointed uphill, snow collecting along his whiskers. "Copy," Caleb said. A pause. Then Mara, lower. "Your window is closing." "I know." He did know. The mountain was tightening around him. He had marked his route with orange tape where he could, but the storm was already swallowing the strips behind him. A lesser man might have called that a sign. Caleb called it information. The way back was becoming more difficult. The way forward was becoming more expensive. The kind of arithmetic no one wanted to do with 4 lives missing somewhere in the sum. Scout moved again. Caleb followed him past a lightning-split pine and over a shallow rise where the wind hit harder. Snow came sideways now, striking Caleb's face like thrown sand. He pulled his hood tighter and kept one gloved hand near the rope clipped to his pack. A faint shape appeared at his feet, and he crouched. A scuff in the snow. Not a footprint exactly. Not anymore. More like the memory of a heel dragged across a thin skin of ice. Beside it, a narrow groove cut down the slope for 2 feet before vanishing under fresh powder. Someone had slipped here. Maybe hours ago, maybe not. Scout pressed his nose near the mark and inhaled sharply. His body stiffened. Then he looked uphill, gave one short bark, and pushed on. Caleb did not radio Mara yet. A scuff was not enough. A mountain made marks all day long and lied with half of them. But inside his chest, something tightened another notch. The slope steepened. His breath came white and controlled. Step, plant, test, shift weight, bring the other foot forward. He moved the way experience had taught him. No wasted anger, no argument with the mountain, no trust given to flat snow until it proved it deserved it. The Scout did not have that discipline. He had something harsher. Need. The dog slipped on a glazed patch of ice and went down hard on his side. Caleb reached him in 2 strides, kneeling into the snow. Scout tried to stand immediately and failed. "Stop," Caleb said. For the first time, the dog looked angry at him. Not afraid. Angry. As if Caleb were the unreasonable one. As if bones and blood and cold should be minor inconveniences when someone was still lost. Caleb slid one arm under Scout's chest and lifted him across the icy patch. The German Shepherd was lighter than he should have been for his size. Too much spine under the wet coat. Too much hunger hiding beneath courage. When Caleb set him down on firmer ground, Scout shook snow from his ears, sneezed once, then limped forward again. Caleb let out a short breath that might have been a laugh if the storm had been kinder. "You're a stubborn old soldier, aren't you?" Scout did not look back. The words landed strangely in Caleb's own ears. Old soldier. He had known men like that. Men who kept walking long after fear had asked politely, then begged, then threatened. Men who did not survive because they were fearless, but because they had made promises fear was not allowed to break. A memory rose before he could stop it. A ridge of broken stone. Radio static. A voice calling his name once, then again, then becoming only breath. Caleb climbing with blood in his mouth, every muscle burning, knowing even as he climbed that the seconds were outrunning him. He forced the image down. Not now. Not here. The mountain did not care about old ghosts. It only cared whether his next step held. Scout suddenly stopped. This time he did not sniff the ground. He stood facing a narrow gap between 2 granite shelves, ears forward, tail low but rigid. The wind poured through that gap with a different sound, a hollow moan that seemed to come from under the snow rather than across it. Caleb felt the small hairs rise at the back of his neck. There was nothing visible beyond the gap but white. Scout took 1 step toward it, then backed away. He whined. Not the urgent pulling from before. Not impatience. Fear. The sound went through Caleb cleanly, because Scout had not feared him. Not trucks, not strangers, not the storm. He had dragged a grown man into a whiteout with bleeding paws. But whatever lay ahead made him hesitate. Caleb crouched beside him. "What is it?" Scout turned his head and looked at Caleb. For 1 strange second, the dog's eyes seemed almost human, not in intelligence but in burden, as if he had carried the memory as far as he could and was asking Caleb to carry the rest. Then Scout stepped forward again. That was the moment Caleb almost turned back, not because he doubted the dog, because he believed him. There were kinds of danger a man could measure. Wind speed, slope angle, time, distance, body temperature. And then there were the older kinds, the ones that arrived in the silence before discovery. And Caleb had felt them before doors kicked open, before ridgelines erupted, before the world changed shape in a single breath. His radio hissed. "Mercer? You still with me?" Caleb keyed it. "Still here. You need to start back soon." He stared into the gap. "Give me 5 more minutes." Mara's reply came fast. "Caleb, 5. Static filled the space between them. Then, 5. No farther without evidence. Caleb clipped the radio back and moved into the gap. The ground dipped beyond it. Snow collected deeper there, drifted smooth by wind. A few low shrubs poked through like drowned hands. Granite rose on the left, dark and slick with ice. To the right, the slope rolled down into a shallow bowl before climbing again into timber. Scout crossed the bowl slowly, nose sweeping. He lost the thread twice. The second time, he turned back toward Caleb, frustration trembling through his body. Caleb scanned the area. No boot print. No pack. No blood. No voice. Just storm. He checked his watch. Mara's 5 minutes were nearly gone. A hard, bitter disappointment moved through him. He hated it because it felt like failure, and failure always wore the faces of people he had not reached. "Scout," he said quietly, "we have to go." The dog ignored him. Caleb took 2 steps toward him. "Scout!" The German shepherd suddenly bolted sideways toward a mound of snow beneath a twisted manzanita bush near the base of a granite wall. The movement was so abrupt, Caleb thought the dog had caught an animal scent. Scout began to dig. Not casual scratching, desperate digging. His front paws struck the snow again and again, throwing powder behind him, bandage tearing loose, nails scraping ice beneath. He made a low, broken sound in his throat. Not a bark, not a growl, but something close to grief. "Scout, stop." The dog did not stop. Caleb dropped beside him and shoved his gloved hands into the snow. The top layer came away loose. Beneath it, the snow was harder, packed by wind. Then his fingers hit something that was not ice. Fabric. No. Rope. Caleb cleared more snow. A torn section of bright orange climbing rope emerged from beneath the drift, caught around the buried branch of the manzanita. The end was frayed and ugly, fibers stretched and sliced as if they had dragged across a sharp stone edge before giving way. Caleb held it in both hands. For a second, even the storm seemed quieter. Scout stopped digging and stood beside him, chest heaving, snow crusted around his muzzle. His eyes were fixed not on the rope, but past it, toward a smooth, pale stretch of snow beside the granite wall. Too smooth, too flat, too untouched by wind. Caleb rose slowly. The mountain had hidden its mouth well. He took one careful step toward the white surface, then another, and felt the emptiness before he saw it. A faint hollow beneath the snow, a silence under the ground, where ground should have been. He lifted the radio. "Mara," he said, voice suddenly low. "Oh, I found hard evidence." Static answered first. Caleb looked at the torn orange rope in his hand, then at the strange, flawless sheet of snow ahead, and behind him, Scout gave one soft, trembling whine. The torn orange rope lay across Caleb Mercer's glove like a warning, written in a language the mountain hoped no one would read. He did not move toward the smooth white patch immediately. That was how men died in the mountains, by mistaking urgency for permission. Caleb lowered himself onto one knee and studied the snow ahead. At first glance, it looked like flat ground, a harmless pale shelf beside the granite wall. But the surface was too clean. The wind had polished it into an unnatural smoothness, and near the edge, where a few pine needles had gathered, the snow dipped inward just slightly. Not much. Only enough for a man who had learned to distrust perfect things. Scout stood beside him, trembling from cold and exhaustion. The German shepherd's yellow-black coat was crusted with ice now, the old brown collar stiff around his neck. He did not pull ahead anymore. He had gone low to the ground, belly almost touching the snow, amber eyes fixed on the pale sheet beside the rocks. His ears were forward, but his tail stayed low. The dog knew enough to stop. That told Caleb more than any map could. "Stay," Caleb said softly. Scout gave a thin whine but did not move. Caleb unhooked the short probe from the side of his pack. It was not a full avalanche probe, just a collapsible aluminum rod he carried for checking drift depth and hidden gaps near rock shelves. He extended it, then leaned forward from solid ground and pressed the tip into the smooth patch. At first, there was resistance. Then the rod punched through, nothing beneath. Caleb froze. The hole widened around the rod as loose snow sifted downward into darkness. Not deep powder, not a hollow under a fallen log. A void. A snow bridge. And the old granite slot had been covered by layers of wind-packed snow. Someone walking through whiteout could cross it without ever knowing that the mountain had opened its mouth below. One section had already failed. The storm had kindly hidden the wound again, the way cruel things sometimes dressed themselves in innocence. Caleb eased back. His radio spat static against his shoulder. "Mara," he said, keeping his voice low. "I found a snow bridge over a granite slot, torn climbing rope at the edge. I'm checking for contact." Static answered him. Then a broken fragment of Mara Bell's voice came through. "Say again, bridge? Location? Western spur, granite wall north of the split pine. I have hard evidence. Possible fall site." The reply dissolved into wind. Caleb clenched his jaw. He did not know how much he had heard, and he took his knife from its sheath and crawled closer on his stomach, spreading his weight over the firmer snow near the granite. Scout crawled beside him, but Caleb put one hand out. "No closer!" Scout stopped, though every muscle in him argued against it. Caleb leaned over a narrow opening between two ice-glazed rocks. The gap was no wider than a man's shoulders. Darkness breathed up from it, carrying cold air that smelled of stone, wet rope, fear, and human bodies trapped too long in the same place. He tapped the butt of his knife against the granite. Once, twice, 3 times, the mountain answered with wind. He waited. Nothing. He tapped again, harder. For a moment, there was only the hiss of snow. Then, from somewhere below, came a sound so faint Caleb almost mistook it for his own pulse. Tap. One answer. Weak. Deliberate. A scout lifted his head and made a sound Caleb had not heard from him before. A small, broken cry. Not fear this time, but recognition. Caleb leaned toward the gap. "This is Caleb Mercer with Search and Rescue. Can anyone hear me?" The silence stretched. Then a woman's voice rose from beneath the snow, cracked and thin, as if dragged over broken glass. "Here." Caleb pressed his forearm into the granite to steady himself. "How many are with you?" A pause. A cough. Then, 4. "There are 4 of us." Scout whined again, louder. The woman below made a sharp, trembling sound. Is that the dog?" Caleb looked at Scout. The shepherd had crawled forward another inch, muzzle pointed into the gap, his eyes bright and wet. "Yes," Caleb said. "He's here." From below came a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not broken halfway into a sob. "He came back," the woman whispered. "God! He came back!" Caleb closed his eyes for one breath. That was the moment the storm changed. Not outside. Outside, the wind still punished the rocks and threw snow across the world with blind fury. But inside Caleb, something shifted from suspicion into certainty. This dog had not dragged him into danger by instinct alone. He had returned to the place where kindness had fallen through the earth. Caleb's throat tightened, but his voice stayed steady. "What's your name?" "Naomi. Naomi Carter." Caleb shone his headlamp through the opening, and angled the beam downward. The light fell into the granite slot and found 4 human shapes huddled in a narrow chamber of stone and ice nearly 26 feet below. Not a cave, not exactly. More like a deep crack in the mountain where fallen snow had built a slanted floor along one side. Naomi Carter was the one closest to the beam. She looked to be in her early 30s, compact and athletic beneath a dark teal climbing jacket crusted with ice. Strands of dark brown hair had escaped from beneath her hat and frozen against one cheek. Her face was pale except for the raw red across her nose and lips, but her eyes still held a fierce, exhausted intelligence. She had the look of a woman who had been afraid for hours and had decided fear would have to wait its turn. And beside her, a man lay half-curled near the wall, one leg twisted at a wrong angle. "That's Paul," Naomi said, following Caleb's light. "Paul Hensley. His leg's bad." Paul appeared late 30s, broad through the shoulders even under a burnt orange mountaineering jacket. His short, blonde-brown hair was wet with melted snow, and his square face had gone gray with pain. He tried to lift one hand when the light touched him, but the movement died before it became a wave. Pride still lived in his eyes, though his body had begun bargaining with cold. 2 others sat pressed together under a torn emergency blanket. "Aaron and Lucas," Naomi said, voice shaking now. "Aaron's not making sense. Lucas keeps fading." Aaron Walsh looked younger than the others, maybe 28, small-framed in a mustard-yellow jacket that would have been bright in daylight, but now looked dim under ice and shadow. Pale strands of hair clung to her temples. Her lips were blue, and her eyes wandered without focusing. Lucas Dunn sat beside her, lean and dark-haired, wrapped in a forest green shell jacket. He was perhaps 30, with the angular face of someone used to long trails and bad coffee, but his chin had sunk toward his chest. Every few seconds he jerked awake as if dragged back from a warm dream. Caleb recognized the signs immediately. Hypothermia was not dramatic at first. It did not always scream. Sometimes it simply made people sleepy, agreeable, confused. It tucked death around them like a blanket and told them to rest. "Naomi," Caleb said, "listen to me. Do not let them sleep." "I've been trying." "You keep trying. We can't climb out." Her voice cracked with frustration more than fear. "It's too deep. The sides are iced over. We tried. The rope cut on the rock when we fell. Paul got trapped. You're done trying to climb," Caleb said. "That part is over. Now you follow instructions." A small silence followed. Then Naomi said, "Okay." Caleb scanned the rim again. The snow bridge was unstable, but the granite on his side was sound if he stayed low and kept his weight distributed. He needed anchors. He needed time. He needed Mara to hear him. He keyed the radio. "Bell, I have visual contact. 4 alive. Repeat, 4 alive. Granite slot approximately 26 feet deep. 1 lower leg injury, at least 2 hypothermic. Need ropes, med kit, litter team, and thermal support." Static tore the message apart. Mara's voice flickered through. "4 alive? Caleb, confirm." "4 alive," he repeated. "Western spur, north of Split Pine. Markers may be buried. Follow my tape if visible. I'm setting temporary anchors." The radio died into a long hiss. Caleb did not waste another second listening to failure. He backed away from the rim and moved toward the low pine he had noticed earlier. It grew out from the slope at an angle, ugly and stubborn, its roots gripping deep into a crack in the granite. Not pretty. Useful. Behind it sat a boulder half buried in snow, heavy enough to serve as a secondary anchor if he cleared around it. Caleb dug with his gloved hands, Then, with the blade of his shovel, exposing root, stone, and frozen earth. His fingers were already losing feeling, but numb hands were still hands. Panic would not make them warmer. Scout tried to stand. "No," Caleb said. The dog ignored him and staggered closer, then collapsed onto his belly near the safe side of the granite, eyes locked on the opening. His body shook violently now. He had spent whatever reserve had carried him down the mountain and back up again. Caleb looked at him for half a second too long. "You did your part," he said quietly. Scout gave one exhausted blink. Below, Naomi called, "Is he hurt?" "He's tired," Caleb said. "Same as the rest of us." It was a gentle lie. Sometimes leadership was choosing which truth people could survive hearing. He tied the first anchor around the pine with a tensionless wrap, then backed it with webbing around the granite boulder. He clipped 2 carabiners, ran the rope through, checked the angle, checked the snow, checked the edge where friction could cut the line. He padded the sharpest contact point with a folded section of spare jacket and a piece of foam from his pack. This was not heroism. Heroism was what people called the story later, when they had warm coffee in their hands and enough distance to sand the terror smooth. Here, it was knots, leverage, judgment, and not dying stupidly. He returned to the rim and lowered the rope carefully through the gap. "Naomi," he called, "can you reach the line?" Her hand appeared in the beam, trembling but functional. "Yes." "You're going to help me rig the first person. Who's most responsive besides you?" A pause from below. "Lucas." "Barely." "Then Lucas goes first if he can follow commands. We get someone up who can breathe, hold heat, and help. After that, you come up." "What about Paul?" "If we pull Paul wrong, we make his leg worse or lose time we don't have. I need you topside before we move him." Naomi understood. Caleb heard it in the silence, the terrible arithmetic of rescue. "Okay," she said. Her voice was breaking, but it did not break all the way. Caleb lowered more rope. Scout crawled to the edge of Caleb's shadow and rested his muzzle on the snow, watching the line disappear into the dark. Caleb looked down into the slot, at the 4 faces caught between stone and storm. "I'm going to bring you up one at a time," he said. "But Naomi, I need you to keep them awake. Talk to them. Make them answer. Do not let that cold get quiet." Naomi's voice rose from below, hoarse but clear. "And I can do that." Caleb tightened his gloves, set his weight against the anchor, and fed the rope into the dark. "Good," he said. "Then let's start." The rope disappeared into the black throat of the granite slot, and for a moment Caleb Mercer could feel all 4 lives hanging from the other end before anyone even touched it. He braced his boots against the packed snow and tested the line with both hands. The anchor held. The low pine creaked once under the load, a deep wooden complaint, but the roots did not shift. The backup line around the granite boulder stayed tight. Good enough was never a phrase Caleb liked, but on a mountain in a whiteout, good enough sometimes meant alive. Below him, Naomi Carter's voice rose from the dark. "I have it." Her voice was hoarse, but still controlled. That mattered. Panic was contagious, but so was discipline. If Naomi could stay steady, the others had a better chance of staying conscious. "Lucas first," Caleb called down. "Can he follow your hands?" There was a pause, then the sound of movement below, boots scraping ice, someone coughing, Naomi speaking close to another person's ear. Lucas Dunn answered after a few seconds, though his words slurred. "I'm here." Caleb leaned closer to the opening. careful not to put weight on the weak snow bridge. "Lucas, listen to me. Naomi is going to help you get the rope around your chest and under your arms. Do not fight her. Do not try to climb. I pull. You breathe. That's your whole job." A weak laugh drifted up from below. "Sounds easy. Best kind of job." The humor was thin, but Caleb took it. If a man could still make a joke, some part of him was still holding the line inside himself. The rope shifted. Naomi worked slowly in the dark. She had cold hands, frightened people around her, and too little space, but she followed Caleb's instructions with the focus of someone who understood that emotion could wait until later. Twice he had her redo the wrap. Once he made her check under Lucas's arms again, so the rope would not ride up under his throat. "Ready?" Naomi called. Caleb set his body low, clipped the haul line through the carabiner system, and began to pull. Not hard. Hard was how ropes burned, knots slipped, injured bodies swung into stone. Caleb pulled in small, controlled movements, gaining inches, locking the line, gaining more. The rope scraped faintly against the padded edge. He watched the contact point like a hawk watches a field. Scout lay a few feet away, not sleeping, not resting, simply enduring. The German shepherd's yellow and black coat was rimmed with frost. His amber eyes followed the rope every time Caleb drew it upward. The dog's breathing came fast, shallow, and tired, but he did not look away from the opening. Below, Lucas made a choked sound. "Talk to him," Caleb called. Naomi's voice answered at once. "Lucas, keep your eyes open. Tell me about that terrible coffee you made this morning." Another voice, faint and confused, muttered something. Naomi snapped back. "No, you do not get to sleep through me insulting your coffee." Caleb pulled again. A shoulder appeared first in the gap, then the top of a hood crusted with ice. Lucas was leaner than he had looked from above. His forest green shell jacket torn at one sleeve, dark hair frozen flat against his forehead, and his face had gone the color of old wax, and his lips were bluish, but his eyes opened when Caleb grabbed the back of his harness and dragged him gently onto the solid side of the rim. "Stay with me," Caleb said. Lucas blinked up at him. He was around 30, built like a man who spent weekends on trails and weekdays pretending fluorescent office lights did not bother him. His cheekbones were sharp under cold, pale skin, and there was a boyishness left in his face that made the blue of his lips harder to look at. "Dog," Lucas whispered. "He's here." Lucas's eyes shifted toward Scout. The shepherd raised his head. For half a second, the man and the dog looked at each other across the snow, both shaking, both pulled out of one kind of darkness and not yet safe from another. Then Lucas's eyelids fluttered. "No sleeping," Caleb said sharply, and he opened an emergency blanket and wrapped Lucas fast, silver foil snapping in the wind. He checked breathing. Weak but steady. Pulse too slow, but present. He dragged Lucas behind the shelter of the granite boulder, where the wind hit less directly. Scout rose unsteadily and limped after them. "Stay," Caleb ordered. Scout ignored him with the exhausted dignity of a creature who had already disobeyed worse things than commands. He lowered himself beside Lucas, pressing his lean, trembling body against the man's wrapped shoulder. It would not warm Lucas enough to matter medically. Caleb knew that. The emergency blanket, wind block, and rescue would do the real work. But Lucas's eyes opened again when he felt the dog beside him. Sometimes survival needed more than heat. Sometimes it needed proof that the world had not fully abandoned you. Caleb returned to the rim. "One up," he called down. Naomi, you're next. No, Naomi answered immediately. Aaron's worse. I need you topside. Aaron is fading, and I need someone who can follow instructions up here before I move anyone who can't help themselves. Silence. Caleb softened his voice, but not the order. Naomi, you've kept them alive this long. Now help me keep them alive from up here. A beat passed. Then she said, Okay. The rope went down again. Naomi moved more quickly with herself than she had with Lucas. Fear often made people clumsy, but responsibility had sharpened her. Caleb could hear her breathing through the gap as she looped the rope, checked it, tightened it. Then she called, Ready? He pulled. Naomi was lighter than Lucas, but she was conscious enough to be dangerous. Twice she tried to help by pushing against the icy wall, and twice Caleb ordered her to stop before she kicked loose stones into the people below. Let the rope work, he said. I hate this, she gasped. Good. Hate it quietly. That earned a breathless sound that might have been a laugh. When Naomi reached the rim, Caleb hooked one arm under her shoulder and guided her over the edge. She collapsed onto her side, coughing hard. Snow stuck to her dark teal climbing jacket and the harness around her waist. Up close, she looked smaller than her voice had made her seem. Early 30s, compact and athletic, with dark brown hair frozen in strands against her cheeks. Her face was pale, raw around the nose and mouth, but her eyes remained fierce, gray-green, alert, refusing to drift even as her body shook violently. As she tried to sit up too fast, Caleb pushed her shoulder down. Slow. I can help. You can help better if you don't pass out. She looked past him to Lucas, then to Scout pressed against the emergency blanket. Her expression changed. Not surprise. Not the broken recognition from below. Something deeper and quieter. She saw the torn bandage on Scout's paw, the blood spotting the snow beneath him, the ice frozen along his belly, the way his eyes kept moving between the people he had found and the black gap in the ground. Naomi's lips trembled. He ran on those feet, she said. Caleb did not answer. The storm filled the silence for him. Naomi swallowed, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. Less fear now, more vow. Tell me what to do. Caleb handed her a second emergency blanket. Keep Lucas awake. Ask him questions. If he stops answering, shake his shoulder. Not hard, just enough. Then hold the tagline when I tell you. Naomi nodded and crawled toward Lucas. Caleb looked back into the slot. Aaron next. From below, Paul Hensley's voice answered this time, strained and rough. Take her. She's not tracking. Paul sounded like a man trying to be stronger than pain. Caleb could hear the effort in every syllable. Late 30s, injured, trapped, and still using his breath to help someone else. That told Caleb something about him before they had ever stood face to face. Paul, Caleb called. How's your leg? A bitter pause. Still attached. Good. Keep it that way. Wasn't planning otherwise. The rope dropped again. Getting Aaron rigged took longer. She was conscious, but confused, and confusion in hypothermia was a thief. It stole cooperation first. Naomi shouted instructions down while Paul, from wherever he was pinned, tried to guide Aaron's arms. Lucas mumbled answers behind the boulder as Naomi kept snapping him back with questions about home, coffee, his sister's name, anything that kept the mind from sinking. Scout suddenly lifted his head. Caleb noticed. The dog was no longer looking at Lucas. He was staring at the rim, not the opening, the snow beside it. His ears came forward. His body stiffened. Caleb paused with one hand on the haul line. A faint crack moved through the snow so quietly that a man less trained to silence might have missed it. Scout barked once, sharp, urgent. Caleb shifted his weight back just as a hairline fracture appeared near his left boot, thin as a drawn pencil. It crawled across the smooth snow toward the weak part of the bridge. He moved the rope angle 2 feet to the right and dropped lower, spreading his weight across the firmer granite side. "Naomi," he said, voice controlled. "Well, when Aaron comes up, you pull her away from the rim. Do not stand. Crawl." Naomi looked at the crack and went pale, but she nodded. Below, Aaron made a small, frightened noise as the rope tightened around her. Caleb began hauling. She was light. Too light in the line, like a coat filled with bones and cold. When her mustard-yellow jacket appeared at the rim, Caleb saw her face clearly for the first time. Erin Walsh was 28 at most, small-framed, with pale hair stuck in icy strands beneath her hat. Her eyes wandered unfocused, and her lips moved as if she were speaking to someone from a warmer place. "Almost there," Caleb said. Erin looked straight through him. "The sun's out," she whispered. There was no sun. Caleb pulled faster, but not carelessly. Naomi crawled forward and helped drag Erin onto the safe side. Together they pulled her behind the granite boulder beside Lucas. Scout barked again. This time the snow answered. A chunk of the rim dropped away with a soft, terrible sigh, vanishing into the darkness below. Not large enough to collapse the whole bridge, but enough to send a spray of snow and ice down into the slot. Paul shouted from below, a sound of pain more than fear. Caleb lunged to the edge on his stomach. "Paul!" "I'm here," Paul called back. His voice was tighter now. "Still here." Caleb exhaled once. Naomi was wrapping Erin in the second blanket, hands shaking but working. Lucas was awake barely. Scout stood now despite his exhaustion, body trembling, eyes fixed on the cracked rim, as if he could hold the mountain together by staring at it hard enough. Caleb looked down into the slot. 2 were up. 2 remained below. 1 was barely responsive, and Paul, the last strong voice in the dark, had a trapped leg and a mountain beginning to crumble above him. Caleb tightened his grip on the rope and felt the old cold certainty settle back into his bones. The first one was out, but the hardest part had just begun. Paul Hensley was the only one left in the dark. Above the granite slot, Caleb Mercer shifted his weight away from the broken rim and dragged the haul line toward the boulder, where the snow had not yet begun to fracture. His gloves were stiff with ice. His shoulders burned. The old pine anchor still held, but the mountain had started making small sounds around him. Settling sounds, warning sounds, the quiet language of things that were tired of bearing weight. Behind the boulder, Naomi Carter knelt between Lucas and Erin, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket that snapped and fluttered in the wind. Her hands shook so badly she had to trap them under her arms between tasks, but her eyes stayed sharp. She kept talking to Lucas, then Erin, then Lucas again, dragging them back from the warm, false sleep that hypothermia offered like a soft bed in a burning house. "Lucas," she said, voice rough but firm, "tell me your sister's name." Lucas blinked under the blanket, face gray-white, forest green jacket stiff with frost. "Maddie." "Good. Erin, look at me. What color is my jacket?" "Erin Walsh," small and pale inside her mustard-yellow shell, stared through the storm as if watching sunlight on a beach no one else could see. "Blue," Aaron whispered. "Close enough," Naomi said, though her mouth trembled. "Stay with me." Scout stood a few feet from them, legs shaking beneath his yellow and black coat. The German shepherd's ears were forward, his amber eyes fixed on the opening where the rope disappeared. He looked less like a hero than a creature held together by stubbornness and cold. Blood had seeped through the torn bandage on one paw, staining the snow in small red commas. Caleb wanted to order him down. He knew Scout would not listen, and the radio at Caleb's shoulder cracked. "Mercer, Bell, do you copy?" Caleb pressed the transmitter. "Copy. I have 3 up, 1 still below, male injured leg, trapped at the bottom." Static tore through the answer. Then Mara Bell came back, broken but recognizable. "Moving west. 3 with me. Followed your markers until they vanished. Give me sound if visual fails." Caleb looked into the white wall around them. Even if Mara was close, the storm could make 20 yards feel like another country. "I'll give you sound," he said, "but I can't wait. Paul's fading." "Do not go fully into that slot," Mara snapped through the static. Even half buried by interference, her command had iron in it. "You hear me, Caleb?" He looked down into the narrow black opening. "I hear you." That was not the same as a promise. Below, Paul's voice rose weakly. "I'm still here." Caleb flattened himself near the rim, careful to keep his chest on granite, not snow. He angled his headlamp down. The beam caught Paul's face far below, pale and tight with pain. Paul Hensley was a big man, even broken. Late 30s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a burnt orange climbing jacket torn at the sleeve and darkened by melted snow. His short blonde-brown hair was plastered to his forehead, and a few days of stubble shadowed his square jaw. There was pride in him, Caleb could tell, the kind of pride some men used as a splint when the body failed. But pride could not warm blood or straighten a trapped leg. "How bad?" Caleb called. Paul swallowed. "Rock has my boot. Legs twisted. I can't get the angle." "Can you feel your toes?" A pause. "Not sure." Caleb's jaw tightened. He turned to Naomi. "Oh, I need you on the tagline." Naomi crawled toward him, keeping low, dragging the blanket around her shoulders. She did not ask if she was strong enough. That was why Caleb trusted her. "What do I do?" "When I lower myself part way, you keep light tension, not a full hold, just control. If I say lock, you wrap the line around the boulder twice and sit back with your weight." Her eyes widened. "You're going down?" "Part way." Mara said, Mara isn't looking at his leg. Naomi stared at him for one hard second. Then she nodded. Caleb clipped himself into the safety line and checked the knot by touch. He lowered a secondary rope into the slot, then eased his body backward over the safest granite lip, keeping his boots braced against the wall. He did not descend all the way, and he only needed 6 feet, enough to change the rope angle, enough to see Paul's trapped boot, enough to do something besides hope. The cold inside the slot was different from the storm above. It did not move. It sat there, dense and ancient, breathing out of the stone. Halfway down, Caleb's headlamp found Paul's leg. The boot was wedged between 2 rocks at an ugly angle, the lower pant leg pinned by a loop of torn rope and a twisted strap from his pack. Every time Paul tried to move, the strap tightened. "No pulling," Caleb said. Paul gave a breath that might have been a laugh. "Wasn't enjoying it anyway." Caleb took out his knife. For 1 second, the beam of the headlamp shook. Not from the cold, The slot became another place, another ridge, another man. A voice in his radio years ago, thin and fading. A teammate named Royce Kellen, pinned behind broken stone, joking through blood because some men would rather die polite than scared. Royce had been 32, dark-skinned, lean, with a clean laugh and a daughter who had just learned to say helicopter. Caleb had reached him 7 minutes too late. 7 minutes. An absurd little number. A number small enough to misplace and large enough to bury a man. Paul groaned below him, and the sound became Royce for half a heartbeat. Caleb's hand froze around the knife. Above, Scout gave a low sound. Not a bark. Not a whine. And a deep, aching rumble from the chest, as if the dog had reached down through the stone and put a paw against Caleb's memory. Caleb looked up. Scout's face appeared at the rim, muzzle frosted white, amber eyes locked on him. The dog was shaking so hard his collar clicked faintly against the ice, but his gaze did not waver. For a strange, impossible moment, Caleb felt as if Scout was not asking him to hurry. He was asking him to come back too. Caleb drew one breath, then another. The past did not loosen. It never did. But it stepped aside enough for his hand to move. "I'm here," Caleb said, though he was not sure whether he meant Paul, Scout, or the ghost of Royce Kellen. He cut the twisted strap first, slow and careful. Then he worked the rope loop free with the knife tip and his gloved fingers. Paul clenched his teeth, a harsh sound breaking in his throat when the trapped boot shifted. "Easy," Caleb said. "Lied about the easy part," Paul rasped. "Yeah, I do that." A faint shout came from above. "Caleb!" Mara. He keyed his radio with his shoulder. "At the slot. Last man still below. I'm freeing the leg." Her reply came closer now, less static. "We see your light. 2 minutes." 2 minutes could be mercy. 2 minutes could also be too late. Caleb freed the boot with one final pull. Paul cried out, then sagged against the stone. "Paul, stay with me." "Trying. Try harder." Caleb rigged the rescue loop under Paul's arms and around his torso, careful to avoid the injured leg. He clipped the line, checked the lock, then looked up. "Naomi," he shouted, "take slack!" The rope tightened. Caleb climbed back up the short distance, muscles screaming, and rolled over the rim onto the granite. Snow struck his face. Air tasted like metal. Through the white, shapes emerged. Mara Bell came first. Red and black SAR jacket iced over, chestnut hair tucked beneath her hood, eyes fierce with focus. Behind her moved Ben Ortiz, a stocky rescue tech in his 40s, with a black beard crusted in snow, and the calm hands of a man who had tied knots in worse weather than this. The third was Leah Price, a tall younger medic with dark skin, close-cropped hair under a wool cap, and a quiet, concentrated expression that made panic seem almost rude in her presence. They dropped beside Caleb without wasting words. Mara took one look at the setup. "Anchor? Pine primary. Boulder backup. Edge padded." Ben checked it fast. "Ugly, but honest." "Paul's leg is bad," Caleb said. "Haul smooth." Leah was already opening her medical pack. "Once he's up, I need space behind the boulder." Naomi crawled back from the line, exhausted, but refusing to let go until Ben replaced her hands with his. "On 3, Mara said. Caleb, Ben, and Mara hauled together. The line tightened. Paul rose slowly through the dark. Once he struck the wall and swore weakly. Caleb adjusted the angle. Ben locked the rope. Mara called cadence over the wind. "Pull, Hold, pull, hold! Scout stood behind them, trembling, eyes fixed on the opening. The orange jacket appeared first, then Paul's shoulders. Caleb grabbed the harness and hauled him over the rim as Ben locked the line. Leah slid in immediately, stabilizing Paul's leg, cutting away fabric, checking pulse, breathing, pupils. Paul's face was ghost pale, but his eyes opened. He looked past Caleb, at Scout. "Dog," Paul whispered. Scout took one step toward him, then his legs folded. Caleb caught him before he hit the snow. For the first time since the trailhead, Scout did not fight to stand. He did not pull, did not bite fabric, did not look toward the mountain with that terrible command in his eyes. He simply leaned against Caleb's chest, all the strength gone from him now that the last man was out. Mara looked from the 4 survivors to the dog in Caleb's arms. Her face changed, not soft exactly, but stripped of argument. She crouched and placed one gloved hand gently on Scout's icy head. "Good dog," she said. Scout blinked once. Caleb held him closer inside the open front of his jacket, shielding him from the wind. Around them, the rescue team began preparing the descent. 4 climbers alive. 1 dog spent to the edge of collapse. A mountain still angry enough to kill anyone careless. But the slot was empty now. And Scout, at last, was still. The mountain did not let them leave quickly. It never did. Even with all 4 climbers out of the granite slot, the descent was not victory. It was work. Slow, brutal, breath-by-breath work through snow that still came sideways and wind that shoved at them like an angry hand. The storm had weakened, but not surrendered. It followed them down the slope, muttering through the pines, shaking loose white powder from branches overhead. Paul Hensley went first on a soft rescue litter, his injured legs splinted and wrapped, his burnt orange jacket bright against the snow like a coal that refused to go out. Ben Ortiz and another rescuer took the front and rear, moving with careful, heavy steps. Leah Price walked near Paul's shoulder, checking his color, his breathing, and the stubborn thread of consciousness he kept losing and finding again. Lucas Dunn and Aaron Walsh were wrapped in emergency blankets, each supported by a rescuer. Their faces still carried the frightening blankness of cold that had gone too deep, but their eyes opened when Naomi Carter spoke to them. Naomi herself walked between Caleb and Mara for the first stretch. She was shaking hard, her teal jacket crusted with ice, her dark hair frozen in strands along her face. Yet she kept turning, again and again, to look at the dog in Caleb's arms. Scout did not move. That was what scared Caleb most. The German shepherd had fought the storm, the slope, the pain in his paws, the distrust of people, the weight of urgency itself. He had pulled, limped, dug, warned, watched. Now his yellow and black body lay slack against Caleb's chest, beneath the open front of the old olive tactical shirt and winter shell Caleb had wrapped around him. Scout's head rested near Caleb's shoulder. His amber eyes were half open, but unfocused. Ice clung to the black fur along his muzzle. The old brown collar had left a dark line in the wet fur of his neck. Caleb kept one arm under the dog's ribs and the other around his back, holding him close enough to share body heat. "You still with me?" Caleb whispered. Scout's ear twitched once. Caleb accepted that as an answer. Mara Bell walked ahead for a while, then dropped back beside him. Her red and black rescue jacket was white with blown snow, and her face looked carved thinner by the day's responsibility. Mara was not a woman who wasted words on comfort when tasks remained, but she looked at Scout now with something almost like shame. He saved our search, she said. Caleb kept his eyes on the uneven slope. He saved them. Mara nodded once. And maybe you. Caleb did not answer. There were truths a man could hear only after he was warm. At the trailhead, the world became lights, headlamps, flashing amber bars, the white glare from the medical tent, trucks half buried in snow, people moving quickly with stretchers, packs, radios, blankets, clipboards. The little parking lot that had been empty and gray hours earlier now looked like a battlefield after the gunfire stopped. Leah helped guide Paul into the medical tent. Aaron and Lucas were taken after him. Naomi refused to go in until she had touched Scout. She came to Caleb slowly, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale and raw from cold. Up close, she looked younger than she had under the mountain, not because her features changed, but because survival had stripped away the armor people wore in ordinary life. "Can I?" she asked. Caleb shifted Scout carefully. Naomi placed her trembling fingers on the dog's head. The Scout's eyes moved toward her. A sound broke in Naomi's throat. "I thought you left us." Scout blinked. She pressed her mouth shut, fighting tears with the same stubbornness she had used to fight sleep. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have known better." Caleb looked away, not out of discomfort, but respect. Some apologies belonged between the living and the creature who had dragged them back to life. Mara stepped beside Naomi. "Medical tent. Now." Naomi nodded, but before she let herself be led away, she looked at Caleb. "His name?" Caleb glanced down at the dog. "Scout." Naomi's mouth trembled into a small, broken smile. "That fits." Then she was taken inside. For a moment, Caleb stood in the snow with Scout in his arms, surrounded by rescuers and engines and voices, and felt more alone than he had on the mountain. Up there, everything had been simple. Rope. Cold. Injury. Time. Down here, people would start turning survival into story. But Scout was still too cold. Caleb, Mara had returned, this time with a woman in a dark green parka carrying a soft-sided animal emergency bag. "This is Dr. Evelyn Hart," Mara said. She was on call for SAR dogs before the storm closed the lower road. Dr. Evelyn Hart was in her mid-40s, tall and spare, with silver beginning at the temples of her dark hair and the tired, steady eyes of someone who had held many frightened animals still while their owners cried. Her face was narrow, wind-reddened, and practical rather than soft, but her hands were gentle before she even touched Scout. She looked at the dog once and her expression sharpened. "Inside my truck," she said. "Now." Caleb followed without argument. Evelyn worked in the back of a heated veterinary response vehicle parked near the medical tent. The space smelled of antiseptic, wet wool, and animal blankets. She laid Scout on a padded mat and began checking him with clean, efficient movements. "Male German Shepherd," she said, mostly to herself. "Adult, about 5 years, underweight, paw lacerations, mild to moderate hypothermia, dehydrated, exhaustion severe." Caleb stood at the rear doors, hands hanging uselessly at his sides. They were scraped from rope and rock, knuckles raw, gloves stuffed in his belt. He had helped pull 4 people out of the earth, yet now he could do nothing but watch a woman wrap a dog in warm towels. Evelyn lifted Scout's paw. Scout flinched. Caleb stepped forward before he knew he had moved. Evelyn glanced at him. "Easy. I'm not hurting him more than I have to." "I know." But knowing did not move him back. She cleaned the paw carefully. "He yours?" Caleb looked at Scout. "No." The answer sounded wrong. Evelyn gave him a brief look, the kind that saw more than a man intended to show. "Stray?" "Maybe. No tag." She checked the old brown collar, turning it under the light. The leather was cracked, the buckle scratched, the holes stretched from long use. There was no nameplate, no phone number. But caught under this buckle was a tiny strip of torn teal fabric. Evelyn eased it free. Caleb stared at it. Naomi's jacket. A piece no wider than a finger, snagged there some time before Scout had run down the mountain. A small, silent proof that he had been close to them in the storm. Close enough for her clothing to tear against his collar. Close enough, perhaps, for him to have tried staying at the edge before leaving. Evelyn held it out. Caleb took it carefully. For a few seconds he could not speak. The mountain had tried to bury everything. Tracks, voices, signals, hope. But it had missed this one little scrap of cloth, carried under the collar of a dog no one had thought to believe. Mara appeared at the open doors, snow melting on her hood. "What is it?" Caleb showed her the fabric. Mara's face changed. Not dramatically. Mara Bell did not break easily, but something in her eyes gave way. "He stayed with them," she said. Caleb looked at Scout. As long as he could. Evelyn continued working. Warm fluids, clean bandages, a small temperature probe, a careful check of gums, ribs, heartbeat. Scout endured it all with the limp exhaustion of a creature who had finally run out of orders to give the world. "You should go get checked," Evelyn said without looking up. "I'm fine." That is what every man says right before he becomes my least useful assistant. Mara almost smiled. "She's worse than me." "Good," Caleb said. But he did not leave. Eventually, Evelyn covered Scout with another blanket and dimmed the light inside the truck. "He needs rest," she said. "Warmth, fluids, food when his stomach is ready. Those paws will hurt for a while, but he should recover." Should. Caleb hated that word. Should was a bridge made of paper, and he sat on the metal step outside the vehicle while the storm thinned into a tired fall of snow. The medical team worked in the tent behind him. Radios murmured. Engines idled. Somewhere, Naomi was alive. Paul was alive. Aaron and Lucas were alive. 4 people who had almost become names on a report. Inside the truck, Scout slept. Caleb stared at his hands. He had waited like this before. Outside aid stations, outside field tents, outside rooms where men with calm voices said they were doing everything they could. Waiting had always felt like punishment to him, because waiting gave memory space. Royce Kellen's voice returned, but softer this time. Not accusation, just presence. Caleb closed his eyes. "I got there this time," he whispered. No one answered. Maybe no one needed to. A soft scrape came from inside the truck. Caleb stood quickly and looked in. Scout had lifted his head, and his eyes were cloudy with exhaustion, but focused now. He looked at Caleb for a long moment, as if making sure the man had not vanished with the storm. Then, with almost no strength, Scout stretched his muzzle forward and caught the fabric of Caleb's pant leg between his teeth. Not hard, not to pull, just enough to hold. Caleb looked down at him. The first time Scout had taken hold of his pant leg, it had been a command. "Follow me. Hurry." Believe me. This time, it was something else. Stay. The word did not come from the dog, of course. Dogs did not speak in human language. They spoke in weight leaned against a leg, in eyes that did not look away, in teeth gentle enough not to wound and stubborn enough not to let go. Caleb sat beside him. Scout kept the fabric between his teeth for another second, then released it and lowered his head with a sigh. Outside, the snow finally stopped. By morning, people would call Scout a miracle dog. Someone would write a clean version for the local paper. GPS failed. Dog succeeded. Former SEAL helped rescue 4 climbers. They would make it sound simple because people preferred miracles after the danger was over. Caleb knew better. Scout had not beaten technology with magic, and he had remembered kindness. He had refused to abandon it. And somehow, in saving 4 people from the cold mouth of the mountain, he had found the one man who still lived, as if part of him were trapped below the snow. Caleb rested one hand gently on Scout's shoulder. "You're coming home with me," he said. Scout did not lift his head, but his tail moved once beneath the blanket. Small, almost nothing. Enough. Sometimes, the greatest miracles do not arrive with thunder, shining lights, or voices from the sky. Sometimes, they come quietly, through muddy paws, tired eyes, and a wounded heart that refuses to give up. Scout was not trained to be a hero. He had no badge, no rescue vest, no words to explain what he had seen. But God can place courage in the smallest creatures, and sometimes He sends help in ways we do not expect. A dog no one claimed became the guide that led a broken man back into the storm, and through that storm 4 lives were saved. This story reminds us that kindness is never wasted. A small act of mercy, a piece of food shared with a hungry animal, a moment of compassion given without expecting anything in return, may return one day in a way we could never imagine. In our daily lives, we may not face a frozen mountain or a deadly storm, but we all know what it feels like to be lost, tired, afraid, or trapped in a place no one else can see. And sometimes, God does not remove the storm right away. Sometimes, He sends someone to walk through it with us. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and if you believe God can send help through the most unexpected messengers. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and help us reach more people who still believe in courage, loyalty, and the quiet miracles God places along our path. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide you through every storm you are facing.